Hello and a very warm welcome to you. Welcome to another edition of The Conversation right here on News Central TV. And on this program, we get to discuss political stories trending across the African continent. And so far, so good. We've had lots of stories coming up on the African continent. Talking about Burkina Faso's junta, which has once again sought more than 2 years in power. We also know that President Muhammadu Buhari has finally signed the Electoral Act Amendment Bill. I'm Rita, Omodia, and I'm not alone on today's edition of The Conversation. I have my co-anchor with me here.
And I'm Gbenga, Aborowa. Like Rita said, quite a lot is happening politically on the continent. But today on the program, we will be looking at the politicking happening in Kenya, as President Uhuru Kenyatta has officially endorsed Raila Odinga for president. We will also be looking at the Russia-Ukraine war. How will it affect Africa? Where does Africa come to play in all of this? So we start off in Kenya, where President Uhuru Kenyatta has urged Kenyans to cast their ballot for long-time arrival former Prime Minister Raila Odinga. It will be the fifth time 77-year-old Raila Odinga runs for president. During an address before his Jubilee Party supporters on Wednesday, President Uhuru Kenyatta said Raila Odinga meant well for the country.
He will vie for the presidency as the Azimio La Umoja Alliance preferred candidate. The alliance is made up of parties such as President Kenyatta's Jubilee Party and now Odinga's Orange Democratic Movement. The president's endorsement of Raila Odinga further isolates Deputy President William Ruto, who will run as the United Democratic Alliance nominee for presidential elections are set for August 9th.
Now, joining us to discuss this is Bobby Mkangi. He is a legal consultant, a public governance and human rights advocate. Very well, welcome to you, Bobby. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Bobby, President Uhuru Kenyatta has officially endorsed the Orange Democratic Movement leader, former Prime Minister Raila Odinga, for the presidency, saying he has the best interests of the country. Why did it take so long? Because I believe the handshake happened a long time ago, and there's been feelers that the president will support Odinga's presidency. So why did it take so long?
Well, I think that's the issue or the question that was in everybody's mind. But once he did it, it was more of just gilding the lily, because for a while now it was rather obvious that the president was going to endorse his former rival, Raila Odinga. The body language, behaviorally, and rhetoric since the handshake, and how the president has been treating his former political ally and current Deputy President William Ruto, it was rather obvious for Kenyans that Uhuru Kenyatta would eventually, one way or another, endorse Raila Odinga. Or the other thing, if not Raila Odinga, it was obvious that he was not going to support his Deputy President or the Deputy President William Ruto. So it's either Raila Odinga, which was, say, 80% chances, or any other of the leading politicians who it was thought and speculated that he would endorse. So at the end of the day, when he did it, it hasn't made any big difference, because, as I mentioned, that was rather expected by many Kenyans. What it does is it obviates the issue. It probably now sets the I would say it's the starting gate now to the hardcore line sort of politics. It also now draws the line and officially now separates the political relationship between Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto. So the endorsement is more the mark of the parting of ways between the two gentlemen, which was as I mentioned, highly expected since the handshake and since William Ruto refused to follow his boss,
All right,
President
Bobby, let's
Kenyatta.
take it from there. What exactly went wrong with the relationship between the President Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto? Because most times you see presidents endorse their deputies, but now we see a different thing happening. So what exactly went wrong?
Exactly. And when you look at the relationship and what they say and what the president had actually previously said, and especially during the last run-up to the last elections, during those campaigns, there was a famous slogan in Kiswahili. It says, yako yangu kumi, yako kumi, meaning my 10 years, meaning it's 2 terms, and then Ruto's 2 terms, 2 5 years terms. So as of 2017, everyone expected that Uhuru Kenyatta would eventually.
Okay, Bobby, sorry to interrupt you. We have some issues with your audio. We'll get back to you in the course of this conversation shortly, so do stick around. Yeah, interesting developments in Kenya.
Yeah.
And like you rightly said, traditionally, and all eyes are also on Nigeria because, you know, you have a loyal vice president that has been VP to President Buhari for, it's going to be 8 years next year. Is the president going to endorse him? Because if you look at American politics, George Bush, former President George Bush Sr. was vice president to Ronald Reagan, and current President Joe Biden was vice president to Obama. So it normally works like that. But
you know, it begins to question what exactly happens, because you see two people going with the same minds, the same ideologies, and you say you want to rule the country, and that's why you have a deputy and, of course, a president. And then after how many years of ruling together, somehow a fraction occurs, and all of a sudden, William Ruto now is not necessarily in accordance with the ideologies of Uhuru Kenyatta.
Oh, yes.
And then you even see someone who was your rival. I mean, politics is very funny.
Exactly.
Raila Odinga was your major rival.
There was serious post-election violence between, because of the current president and Raila Odinga. Now, like, that's what they say in politics. No permanent friends, no permanent enemies, only permanent interests. So you always find somebody that aligns with your interest in order to, the ultimate goal is to get to office. So even if it means supporting your former enemy. But yesterday, during the speech where President Kenyatta endorsed Raila Odinga, he did say, you know, in a veiled reference to Deputy President Ruto, he did say that, you know, if he reforms later in the future, he might he might get his support. So I mean, Deputy President Ruto is still young. His time might come, but
it seems more like a betrayal for me.
Yeah,
for me, it seems like a betrayal.
Yes, but ordinary Kenyans don't. I'm sure majority of them don't see it like that. And I have to admire his courage. He's been alienated and for about 3 years, and he didn't resign. I mean, what you expect is most people resign.
Say, but no, he's still coming in and saying, no, I still have a chance in this election. And talking about this BBI initiative between Raila Odinga and Uhuru Kenyatta, there's caused a lot of rancor in Kenya also.
Oh, yes, and we'll get to that. It's one of the major issues that caused the division between Deputy President Ruto and Kenyatta, but we'll get to that. Bobby, we're happy to have you back. Just to follow up on Rita's question, she asked why traditionally you expect your president to endorse his deputy president. Why is this not the case between Deputy President Ruto and President Kenyatta?
The bigger reason is the handshake that was between President Uhuru Kenyatta and former Prime Minister Raila Odinga, and right after the handshake, which also ushered in a new political engagement and a relationship between the two gentlemen, unfortunately pushed away.
I think we have audio issues with Bobby. But like he said, I mean, Bobby's first line of response was the BBI.
Yeah.
So the BBI was what divided them, I guess, and then the famous handshake
that brought Raila Odinga and Uhuru Kenyatta together. You know, for this election, a lot of people are looking out to it because most times it's more of a two-horse race. And then we also have a post-election violence happening in Kenya. So it's posed a lot of questions. Are we going to have this same kind of violence happening in Kenya after the elections? What's going to happen? How viable exactly is William Ruto now that we have the president not backing him? Do you see him winning the contest in this?
And all the big wigs, let's not forget. But like you said, traditionally, it's always a two-man horse race in Kenya. But you have two former prime ministers in the person of Monsieur Kalonzo and Musalia Mudavadi that are also contesting. They're heavyweights. And you also have Gideon Moi, who's very big in Mount Kenya. So I don't know if the third element will go into an alliance.
That's what usually happens. We have different big heads, and somehow at the end they end up aligning with someone who they feel will actually win the race.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, like I said earlier, you need you can't do it alone. You need help from different quarters.
You know, another major characteristic of Kenyan election is the issue of vote buying. I think earlier on, while discussing Kenyan elections, we talked about how much there's vote buying going on in Kenya, talking about the president, talking about even the last elections. We still had issues of vote buying going on in Kenya.
We'll get to that, and I think Bobby is back. Nice to have you back, Bobby. Hello, Bobby.
Yes, can you hear me?
Okay, great. Yeah. I'll just let you complete your... make your statement, complete your previous statement with regards to the BBI and the handshake.
Yes, so those are the two things that eventually separated and widened the wedge between the president and his deputy. And because William Ruto did not accede to his boss's political ambitions and plans, because of Raila Odinga sort of coming in and becoming the new right-hand man. So gradually they parted ways, and until what we saw this week, the president doing what, as you had asked earlier, why he didn't say it earlier, rhetorically, expunge his former friend and ally from his political adventures into the future. So that's the main reason. And as you said earlier, to many Kenyans, especially the supporters of the deputy president, they see this as a betrayal, because many of those who voted for the pair, both in 2013 and 2017, voted for them with the understanding that after the 10 years of Uhuru's tenure, the same supporters would go out and vote for his deputy, because the deputy had endorsed and supported the president on the two occasions. And it is widely believed that if it were not for the support of William Ruto, and William Ruto asking his multitude of supporters to vote for the president, then the president would not have made it. So when the president turns around and does not endorse William Ruto and endorses instead their once arch rival Raila Odinga, there are those supporters of William Ruto who are not taking this lightly, and as they feel that this is a betrayal of the highest order.
Okay, a betrayal between president and deputy president. Earlier on, you talked about the handshake between Raila Odinga and Uhuru Kenyatta, and of course the Building Bridges initiative between them as one of the factions that caused this dispute between the president Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto. Why do you think the deputy president William Ruto is so much against this BBI initiative?
Because this week the president did claim that William Ruto was aware of the handshake, that he kept him, informed when he was talking to Raila Odinga. and that on previous occasions also he has said that he was aware about BBI, and he had actually he had some representatives in the task force that went around the country, or dealt with the proposals that were within the BBI report and eventual constitutional amendment bill. So the bill, especially the constitutional amendment bill and the content thereof, and the way it sought to amend the executive structure of the country, was seen that it, by and large, was a scheme to bring in Raila Odinga. There was also speculation that it was a way of retaining the president in one way or another within the executive, that yes, he was going to retire as president, as the constitution only allows a president to serve for 2 terms. But there was, speculation that the creation of the position of prime minister would allow him to sort of doing what Putin did, in early 2000s and the 2010s in Russia. So it was seen that it was a scheme to kick out William Ruto and bring on board Raila Odinga and his allies. So for William Ruto, this was more of a political game and not a altruistic constitutional review process, but a political misadventure meant at locking out any politician, including himself, who was not in support of the 2 gentlemen and the handshake, and then bring in Raila Odinga and whoever else would play to the tune of the president and Raila Odinga.
Now, Bobby, this endorsement is quite a big deal, because if you look at dailies in Kenya, a lot of the headlines this morning were on the formal endorsement of President Kenyatta, of former Prime Minister Raila Odinga. How big of a deal is this endorsement in Kenyan politics when the incumbent president has an anointed candidate? How big of a deal is it in the grand scheme of things when it comes to politics?
And does it limit the chances of William Ruto?
Not as such, because as I said earlier, it was already expected. It was something that Kenyans, in as much as he had not rhetorically pronounced it, it was well known to Kenyans that even if it's the endorsement of any other candidate, what was obvious was that the president was not going to endorse William Ruto. So for William Ruto and his supporters, and the way he has played his politics, going and making inroads, and even especially within what would be said to be the heartland of the president's political region, and amalgamating many politicians from that area and different parts of the country. So it's as if he was ready and he was aware that this would eventually happen. And just to say again, historically, when we've had a president, and especially an outgoing president, endorsing or tapping a would-be successor, that has gone horribly wrong. And this actually happened in 2002 when the outgoing president, the late Daniel Arap Moi, actually endorsed and picked the incumbent president, Uhuru Kenyatta, as his successor. And that led to backlash from the party, his party, that was the Kenya African National Union, KANU, and the many senior politicians within the party, and also Kenyans, because they saw that the president was not allowing them to make their political and democratic choice of choosing the president they would want. But the president was sort of, shoving into their mouths a candidate they didn't want. So historically, endorsements have not gone very, very well. And that's why when Mwai Kibaki was leaving office, he was, in as much as everyone knew he supports Uhuru Kenyatta, he was very quiet about it, and his support was very indirect. It
Now,
was seen that
Bobby,
probably.
aside from the endorsement of Uhuru Kenyatta, or rather of Raila Odinga by Uhuru Kenyatta, are you confident of the electoral body? I mean, the elections are August 9th. We've seen a series of post-election violence in 2007, and right now we have 2022 August approaching. Are you confident of the electoral body to conduct free and credible elections in Kenya?
It's going to be a huge challenge for the electoral management body because there are so many things that have happened and too late into the game. We are still going through the process of trying to refine the electoral legislative infrastructure through review and amendments in Parliament. This is 5 months to the elections. We have commissioners, 4 commissioners who, were commissioned to serve within the body about 4 or 5 months ago. Again, this is very late into the game. This brought huge problems in 2017 because we had commissioners who came in as late as September, October 2016. So all these issues of trying to make preparations late into the game definitely portend to elections that are going to be not very well prepared for. And any little problems thereof definitely send jitters to the electorate, where they would feel that perhaps the electoral management body is not playing fairly. But most of the times you come to discover that the IBC is almost set up by the politicians and especially the national government by, say, resourcing it fairly late, politicians making changes to the infrastructure, electoral legislative infrastructure late into the game. And here already you're seeing, because they've had 2 mass voter registration exercises, which you'd say, or we can say, were a failure because they didn't hit the target. So it means there's a bit of apathy, and especially amongst the youth. So to the minds and hearts of a good chunk of Kenyans, they feel that perhaps elections this year are going to be like any other, not very well prepared, not very well administered and overseen. And there's also talk, which to some extent is propaganda, and largely coming from the state and politicians allied to the president, including one who stated that the vote was rigged in 2017. So all this rhetoric points to or breeds suspicion, which is not very, very conducive.
Thank you very much,
and
Bobby.
especially the history
We
of our
will
country.
definitely be monitoring the events come August the 9th presidential elections. Kenya is an East African economic powerhouse, and of course, we do want to know how things go there. Thank you very much for taking time to join us on the conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, we've been talking about former President Uhuru Kenyatta's endorsement of former Prime Minister and ODM leader Raila Odinga. When we come back, we'll switch gears and talk about the current conflict in Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia. Do stay with us. It's the conversation. Welcome back to the conversation. Russia on Thursday launched a massive invasion of Ukraine. In a televised address early on Thursday, President Putin justified his action, asserting that the attack was needed to protect civilians in eastern Ukraine. He also accused the United States and its allies of ignoring Russia's demands from Ukraine to be barred from joining the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, and for security guarantees. He also called Ukraine an artificial creation and denied its right to statehood.
Now, as a lot of Western powers have condemned it, Russian tensions with the West escalated amid the Ukrainian conflict. A relationship between other countries will be tested. Who gets to decide who? Now, where does Africa come to play in all of this? After all, the fight is between Russia and Ukraine. Unfortunately, when world powers come to play at war, it is the bride and children that suffers it all. Russia has played an increasing role on the African continent through trade, aid, military training, and paramilitary security. As a strategy to increase its presence, it is scheduled to hold Russia-Africa Summit this November. Now that it is at loggerheads with the European states, Africa might be forced to choose a side or pick a struggle. Now, joining us live to discuss this issue as it affects Africa is Mutaru, Muqthar and Mubarak, Aliyu, a political scientist all the way from Ghana. Thank you so much for joining us on the conversation.
Hello, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Warm welcome to you, gentlemen.
So let's start with you, Mutaru. We saw Ghana, Kenya and Gabon, Africa's current representatives at the UN Security Council, condemn Russia's invasion on Ukraine. Now, we also saw South African government call on Russia to immediately withdraw its forces from Ukraine in line with the United Nations Charter. Other individual African countries have remained quiet. What do you make of these responses?
Well, this is a game of the big boys, in a conflict that has huge, huge consequences for all countries in all parts of the world. And Africa stands to be significantly impacted by this conflict. We've seen the interconnected nature of Russia in terms of the entire value chain relating to oil supplies and related sectors. We've seen the dependence of some African countries in terms of oil and in the areas of military, security, education, and other areas. So there's a huge, huge, issues at stake here. And Africa would want to be very careful in terms of how they respond or react to this incident that is still unfolding. And so we're looking at the interests of Africa at stake. What are the issues at stake? If we look at the entire West African sub-region, we depend significantly on Western Europe and the United States. But more so in very recent times, apart from military cooperation, we're seeing the involvement of Russia in trade in many ways that has never been before. So for instance, you're seeing Gazprom and other organizations that have partnerships and agreements with African governments to supply, for supplies on home soil. And so there's going to be significant impact in terms of what is going on. And African countries would want to be careful about how they take sides or they respond in this situation.
Thank you very much, Mutaru. Mubarak, coming to you, some of the consequences of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it's food security for Africa. As we all know, it was the price of bread has cost a revolution in so many countries, and wheat is very important when it comes to food security in Africa. Ukraine is in the top 5 wheat producers in the world, and Nigeria, for example, 90% of our wheat demand is met abroad. What are the implications of this for food security in Africa, and what does it tell us to have, the dependency is even worse in Northern Africa to have so much, we're blessed with so much arable land, and we import such an important staple from abroad.
Right. Thank you very much. Yes, you are right by stating the heavy reliance on wheat from the region, both Russia and Ukraine. And I think the most dramatic effect will be felt in the Maghreb region, precisely Egypt, Algeria, and Sudan as well, who are the major importers of wheat who heavily rely on wheat to make bread. Now, we know the impact that this can have on the supply chain, as mentioned earlier, but it's also important to remember the role bread plays in political stability in these regions. The rising prices of bread has played a crucial role in the Arab Spring. It played a more recent role in the crisis we saw in Sudan in the past 2 years. So we cannot underplay the impact that wheat shortages will have on these countries, not only in terms of food security, but also in terms of actual security in general. And I think the disruptions in the supply chain also brings in the question of African countries being net importers, right? So we import more than we export, and we heavily rely on foreign importations of food and also refined oil. But staying on the topic of agriculture, I think disruptions in trade around the Black Sea area in general is going to affect consumers. But on the other side of the coin, farmers might make more money in the short term, local farmers, I mean. Yes.
Yeah.
Now, aside from agriculture, it seems all attention has shifted to the Russia-Ukraine crisis. What will happen to conflicts that are quite urgent here in Africa, such as the Sahel, the jihadist insurgency, the conflict in Mozambique and Ethiopia? This question is for you, Mutaru.
Yes, of course. The Sahel would significantly be an area of interest in terms of how the leaders in here respond to what is going on. We've already seen the significant feature of Russia in the situation in Mali, the use of Russian contractors or private security operators in Mali, and what it means for the entire region, and also in the West. We've seen so far very, very significant shift, of course, is still developing in terms of some countries' reaction to what is going on. Ghana, for instance, as a member of the United Nations Security Council, has stated categorically its opposition or condemnation of the war in in Ukraine. We've seen few other countries, including Kenya, of course, in the East. We are seeing growing numbers of countries within the Sahel come out. It is still a very unpopular stance for any country within the Sahel to come out clearly to support Russia. Even Mali, that is currently benefiting from Russia, it's still very mute on that. And so they know that what is going on would have ripple effects in terms of negative consequences for the security situation. There's already a very difficult situation in terms of the role of France and European security operators within the Sahel. And so it is going to have huge impact, and countries within the Sahel would want to rather, express their support in terms of our opposition to Russia and Ukraine, as it would have negative consequences.
Thank you very much, Muqthar. Now, back to you, Mubarak. President Putin justified his actions by asserting that the attack was needed to protect Russian security concerns. They don't feel comfortable with a country that they share border with joining NATO, and they've also talked about Ukraine not respecting the Minsk agreement. Are his reasons justifiable or legitimate? And do you think, he's been pushed to the wall? Is this an appropriate response?
So I think we cannot really say if these excuses are justifiable. As far as NATO expansion, we have seen some increasing expansion of NATO towards Ukraine, and this has been a major reason for what's happening at the moment. But I can't say for certain that the reasons are justifiable. And
sorry to interrupt you there. Let's try to flip things around for a minute and assume that Russia got into a security pact with Mexico. And with students of history will always remember the Cuban Missile Crisis when the world was very close to a nuclear war in the 1960s. Do you think America, the United States of America, will tolerate war games within their sphere of influence, or will tolerate having Mexico get into an alliance with Russia, for example? Hypothetically speaking.
Absolutely not. I think the Cuban Missile Crisis is an excellent example, and we have seen the strong hand sticks policy that the United States has played with Cuba, and Cuba has been under sanctions since the alliance that it built with the Soviet Union at the time. So I think given this analogy, we can sort of say that it is understandable that Russia would not accept expansion into Ukraine, NATO expansion towards Ukraine. Now, we must remember, though, that a full-on invasion is very different from the economic sanctions we have seen in Cuba.
Yeah.
And this makes the situation in Ukraine very different in terms of the reaction to expansion towards Russian territory, as opposed to the reaction we saw during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, we might also compare this invasion to the Bay of Pigs at the time, but the Bay of Pigs was also very different from a full-on military attack as we are seeing. So I think we should be careful making these comparisons. And I think when it comes to the relationship Russia has with a lot of its neighbors, it is radically different from the relationship America has with their neighbors. So these comparisons are not always helpful in that sense.
Okay, while we are talking about justification for Putin's actions, we know that there was actually a signed agreement with NATO, just like Gbenga rightly said. So now, would you blame it on NATO? Did NATO actually betray Putin? And how would you assess NATO's response so far? Mubarak?
Yes.
I think NATO's response so far, as we have seen with Ukraine, has not been enough. Some people might actually accuse NATO of agitating and making the situation worse. We have seen the Ukrainian president say yesterday that NATO is not doing enough, and sanctions might not actually be enough to stop Russia from more aggression. And as the Russian forces close in on Kiev, we have seen NATO still refuse to bring in any sort of military help, which is a core principle of NATO. Right. So from one angle, NATO has failed to be pragmatic and provide actual security forces on the ground. And on the other hand, we might say that the economic sanctions are a way of stretching diplomacy to its limit to see what is possible when Russian citizens and Russian officials as well have been denied access to certain goods and access to trade with the big countries, the EU as well.
Thank you very much, Mutaru. Now let's listen to NATO's call for President Volodymyr Zelensky call for sanctions on Russia.
Nous allons frapper le système financier russe. Nous allons frapper les banques russes. Nous voulons isoler financièrement la Russie. Nous voulons couper tous les liens entre la Russie et le système financier mondial. Nous allons assécher les financements de l'économie russe. J'ai conscience que ces sanctions peuvent avoir un impact sur quelques entreprises françaises. Je veux redire à quel point c'est sans comparaison avec l'impact que ces sanctions auront sur l'économie russe et sur les intérêts économiques de la Russie. J'ai eu hier l'occasion de m'entretenir avec un certain nombre de secteurs, de l'aéronautique, du nucléaire, de l'automobile, pour voir quelles entreprises pourraient être touchées. Mais je le rappelle, l'économie française est peu exposée à la Russie. La Russie est un partenaire économique secondaire de la France. Fait partie des options. C'est la toute dernière option, mais c'est une option qui est sur la table. This is the very last resort, SWIFT, but this is one of the options that remains on the table.
Alle Optionen liegen auf dem Tisch. Aber wir haben bereits eine vollständige Blockade russischer Banken. Damit ist der Geschäftsverkehr mit Russland bereits nahezu beendet. Im Einzelfall sind Transaktionen noch möglich, beispielsweise um Gaslieferungen zu bezahlen, beispielsweise damit deutsche Unternehmen Überweisungen an ihre eigenen Tochterunternehmen in Russland vornehmen können. Weitere Schritte sind möglich, müssen aber in ihren Auswirkungen bedacht werden. Es geht ja darum, die russische Wirtschaft mit Konsequenzen zu belegen. Today, we assess the economic consequences. We will have a discussion on how we can protect our people and our economies. There are, of course, consequences out of the energy sector, for example, but we are prepared.
We just heard the French finance minister and the German finance minister talking about the variety of sanctions they have available, and some have already been put in place. Now, Mutaru, this morning we heard President Volodymyr Zelensky. He wasn't really happy, the Ukrainian president, saying he called 27 NATO member countries to ask them if they would give any guarantees for Ukraine to join NATO, and it was met with silence. Do you think, I mean, looking at the luxury of hindsight, that he made a mistake in believing that NATO would be there to protect them beyond sanctions and, you know, helping with arms? What more could NATO do to stop Putin from further advancement?
Well, I think that from hindsight, I do not think that they would believe or think that they made a mistake. But even the question at this point seems quite misplaced, because an answer might, you know, inflame passions from both or either side of the situation. And I think that Ukraine is in this particular situation, first of all, one, because Ukraine is not a member of NATO. If Ukraine were a member of NATO, the response would have been far, far more adequate than it really is right now. You take, for instance, when Turkey shut down some, craft in the Syrian situation. If Turkey wasn't a member of NATO, the response of Russia would have been severe, would have been far-reaching. But we didn't see that. The second point is, at the moment in Europe and globally, there isn't enough appetite for war and for a conflict of this nature to take on Russia. And that is why we're seeing the universal reliance on sanctions on the state and state institutions and business people. That sense of appetite for war isn't there. And so we're not seeing, the parties involved or the alliance talking about the option of war as a belligerent force in this case. And that's why there's that kind of situation or reaction to the situation.
Now, Mutaru, quickly, what lessons can African leaders learn from all this? I mean, we've seen a lot of repercussions from the alliance between Ukraine and NATO. What can African leaders learn? Is it a time that we speak with one voice now?
In the international space,
yes,
coalitions are always very, very important, powerful, and effective. If you negotiate building coalitions, it's often a big source of strength to deliver. And we are not seeing that enough since the days of independence. The call for a United States of Africa has always been on the agenda. Unfortunately, we have not succeeded in doing that. It is now more important than ever for us to be able to form such coalitions around military and around trade. Of course, we've seen regional trade blocs like the SECA, the ECOWAS, and the various other regional blocs in terms of trade that have been largely significant in terms of success. We need to see that replicated at a continental level in terms of building military coalitions for the common interest of Africa. But we will not be able to do so at the present time if we are still largely dependent on external sources of financing as nations in terms of economy, in terms of our security programs and actions in here. That we're currently seeing the fragility of the Sahel has been significantly exposed in times of terrorism and in time of COVID and in times of coups. And that tells you how fragile and how vulnerable we are as a continent, as regional groupings. And this is a huge lesson for all of us. We need to act on that now swiftly than ever before.
All right, Africa needs to act now. We need to stand together. Thank you so much, Mutaru and Muqthar, for your views, and also Mubarak, Aliyu, for sharing so much insights on all this.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. And this is where we draw the curtains on today's conversation. We earlier spoke about President Uhuru Kenyatta's endorsement of former Prime Minister Raila Odinga, and we just concluded our conversation on the Russia-Ukraine crisis. I'm Gbenga, Aborowa.
And I'm Rita Omodia. Till next week, have a lovely weekend.